The year is 2025, and come late February, Austin Dean Pikaart is set to turn 18 years old. In Western culture, turning 18 is one of the most greatly anticipated milestones in a person's life. Legally, it's the day that you officially transcend that glorious metaphorical bridge into adulthood. The biggest perk being, of course, that as long as you stay within the limits of the law, you're no longer required to answer to anybody but yourself. You have achieved ultimate autonomy. Well, perhaps this is why Austin Pikaart's mother, 39-year-old Katie Austin Lee, wants to ensure that this year she makes her son's birthday extra super special. Except that this year there's going to be just one small catch. You see, this year Austin isn't asking for another Marvel comic book or another one of the DC movies it said he has such an affinity for. According to Katie, this year Austin would ask her for something a bit unorthodox. And as determined as Katie is to make her son's birthday wish come true, she can't help it when just one day before the big day, all of her meticulous planning, it all just hits an unexpected snag. Hence on Friday, February 21st, with it being too late to return the gift, Mother Katie would see no choice but to pick up the phone and make a call for help, to none other than 911. If you're confused, that's probably normal, and consequently what follows in just a moment is one of the most bizarre, nonsensical 911 calls I've happened across in quite some time. For now, I won't say anything more. All you really need to do is just listen, and I will be back at the conclusion of our recording because, suffice it to say, we're probably going to need to have a little talk.
Ottawa 911.
Hi, I need an officer here immediately.
Okay, to where?
Bay Point Apartments.
Okay, what's going on?
My son won't stop breathing.
He won't stop what?
Breathing?
He won't stop breathing?
Right.
Okay. Like, is he, breathing too fast?
We were gonna leave yesterday, and it got way out of hand. And I couldn't get him to stop breathing like he made me promise to do.
Okay, so is he asking you to, kill him? I don't understand.
Yeah, that's what I've been doing for a while. And I can't get him to stop breathing.
Okay, hang on one second here. How old is your son?
He is going to be 18 tomorrow, but he didn't want to turn 18.
Is your son awake?
No, he's just not stopping breathing.
Okay, can you get in a separate room from him?
I am.
Okay. Are there any weapons in the home?
I used a knife.
Okay, where did you cut him?
It got out of hand.
Okay, what happened?
It was supposed to just be easy, and he was just going to go to sleep. And it didn't work. And he kept telling me not to let him go to the hospital.
Okay. Where's the knife now?
It's in the room.
With him or with you?
With him.
Okay. I want you just to leave it where it's at, okay? Are there any other weapons in the home?
There's a couple more knives in there.
Okay. Don't only leave the phone in your hand as you're talking to me, okay? Has anyone been drinking at all tonight?
I did not, but
Did he?
No, we took medicine.
Well, how much medicine? How much medicine did you guys take?
A lot.
Okay, what
we
did
don't
you
want to
take?
be here anymore. We don't want to be here anymore. We're done.
Okay. How much medicine did you take? What did you take?
All different stuff.
Was it like medications or like drugs?
Medications.
Okay. What is your name?
My name is Katie.
Katie, what's your last name?
Lee.
Lee? L-E-E?
Yes.
Okay, what's your son's name?
His name was Austin.
Austin? Is his last name the same?
Pikaart.
Can you spell it for me?
Pikaart.
Oh, and you said he is 17. Tomorrow's his 18th birthday.
Yeah, he didn't want to turn 18. I was going to wait until he turned 18. But he didn't want to turn 18.
Okay. Is there anybody else with you guys in the apartment?
No.
Okay.
Cats.
Okay.
Which
Okay.
I miss.
Yeah, we'll just leave the cats where they are right now, okay, Katie? Okay, Katie, what do you have in your hand?
I didn't do this.
No, it's okay, Katie. I didn't
do this out of hatred. It was out of love.
Okay.
The world is not going to be okay for him.
Okay. What's in your hands right now, Katie?
My phone?
Just your phone, or is there something else?
No.
Okay. When you last saw your son, how many cuts did he have on him? Where did you cut him?
It was only supposed to be one.
Okay, it was supposed to be one, but how many are there?
It didn't work. So there's 3.
Okay, where did you cut him?
They'll see.
Okay, no, but I need to know for everyone that's coming.
You wanted me to.
Okay, but where did it happen at? Where did you cut him at?
In his bed.
Okay, where on his body?
On the arteries.
On where?
On his throat. And his arm.
Both arms?
Just one.
One arm?
He didn't feel anything.
Okay. Did he pass out before you cut him?
Yes.
Okay, was that due to the medications?
Yes.
Okay, can you tell me what medications that Okay, can you tell me what medications that you guys took?
Gabapentin, Tylenol PMs, and just some others. They had hydroxyzine.
Okay. Do you know how much you guys took?
No.
No? Okay. When did you guys take the medication?
I would have never done this. Yesterday at 1 o'clock.
At 1 o'clock in the afternoon or 1 o'clock in the morning?
At 1 in the afternoon. I couldn't make it work. I have tried so hard.
So when did you cut him then?
I don't know.
How long ago do you think?
Like 6 o'clock.
Like 6 o'clock in the afternoon?
Yeah.
Okay, and he's been breathing.
Family, I love them.
Okay, no, hang on, Katie. I got a couple more questions. So,
but either way, I'm not going to see them.
Well, Katie, we're going to talk. Oh, you need to puke?
The police officers are here.
Okay, yep, I want you to keep your phone, only your phone in your hand, Katie. Nothing else. Katie? Katie?
The Holland police would arrive at the mother and son's shared apartment at approximately 4:15 a.m. Although Katie had initially dialed 911 to report that she could not get her son to stop breathing, by the time first responders pull into the complex at 791 East 16th Street in Holland, Michigan, Austin would already be gone. Later on, a coroner would confirm the details that Katie had given the call taker. That is, he'd suffered 3 cuts, one across the throat and 2 on his arm, the former which proved to be fatal. His death was easily ruled a homicide. Going back to the Bay Point apartments on that fateful night, upon the police's arrival, it soon became clear that Mother Katie, who had sounded so meek and feeble just moments ago during that call, was not planning to go down without a fight. She'd been telling the truth about the weapons, that is, multiple kitchen knives, would be found at the scene, one of which she'd be found clutching and refusing the officers' orders to release. Instead, she begged officers to end her life so that she could go on and be with her son. When officers naturally refused, a struggle to apprehend the woman would ensue. Still refusing to drop her weapon, Katie threatened one of the officers. Cops eventually saw no choice but to tase the crazed lady, after which they were finally able to apprehend her. Ms. Lee was then taken to a hospital where she would be treated for the overdose of medications she had purportedly ingested. A few days later, Mother Katie would be let out and arraigned in a taped court appearance, which I'll be sharing with you in just a few moments. In the courthouse, Katie's entire demeanor would appear to be just a little bit off. She spent a majority of the time with her gaze cast downward, and whenever she attempted to speak, her hoarse voice only managed to crack and whimper. Before I play some of those segments for you, I want to quickly provide everyone with this brief timeline of events with respect to the crime, just so that everyone's clear on exactly what took place in those early morning hours of the 21st. As Katie told investigators, it was around 1 p.m. on Thursday, February 20th, 2025, that the mother-son pair would both ingest what she referred to as, quote-unquote, a lot of medication. For a pair that had supposedly had all this meticulously planned out, the preparation was sure shoddy, as became apparent when Katie admitted to just taking whatever medication they happened to find lying around the house, seemingly irrespective of what it was, and seemingly indifferent of what it was even used for. Katie claims that it was at about 6 p.m. that same day, roughly 5 to 6 hours later, that after the medication had failed to work as the duo had hoped, that she would resort to more drastic means. Like she'd explained to the call taker, the idea had been to take the medicine and simply fall peacefully into an eternal slumber. But by early evening, when this hadn't worked, Katie claims that her son begged her not to take him to the hospital, at which point things, quote-unquote, got out of hand. Feeling it was her sick motherly duty to put her only son out of his misery, Katie marched into the kitchen to retrieve a knife. Then, as he lay there in his very own bed, she would proceed to slice his throat. When Katie realized that Austin was still breathing, she would also slice him twice more along his arm, her goal being to penetrate the boy's arteries. Katie would swear that Austin had felt no pain throughout this ordeal. As she had relayed to the dispatcher, Katie made sure he was asleep before issuing the cuts to his body. Interestingly enough, while the son seemed to be going in and out of consciousness, the mother was able to remain fully awake, coherent, and functional. This in spite of the idea that both she and Austin, who had shared the same determination to pass on, had consumed presumably equally copious amounts of medication. Setting that dubious inconsistency aside, at least for now, a bit of basic math reveals that if Katie stabbed her son at somewhere around 6 p.m., and she called 911 around 4 a.m., then that means roughly 10 whole hours went by from the time that Katie slit her son's throat and the time at which she finally decided to call emergency services. I'm sorry, but I can't not ask it. What on earth was Katie doing for 10 entire hours as her son purportedly lay there cut and bleeding, but yet still alive and breathing? What went on during that 10-hour period prior to Katie giving in and placing that call to 911 is really anybody's guess, but 10 hours is truly an outrageously long time to just sit there and wait for your son to stop breathing, as she put it. But until we're given any further information, we'll need to rely on our imaginations for this one. Returning back to our timeline, Katie's 911 call comes in just after 4 a.m. on Friday, February 1st, 2025, and cops arrive at her place at about 4:15, less than 8 minutes after the phone call begins. By then, after waiting 10 long hours, not knowing what else to do, at some point between the time she picked up the phone and the time officers would come storming in, Austin would presumably at last take his final breath. He was pronounced dead on scene. According to Katie, had he lived, Austin would have celebrated his 18th birthday the very following day. Something that, according to her, he vehemently did not want to do. We already know what takes place once the police showed up on scene. A couple days later, after Katie's release from the hospital, she's taken into police custody, and then on Monday, February 24th, she attends her arraignment. And since we've got a few clips to play from that, as I mentioned, let's go ahead and get that out of the way right now.
All right. Good afternoon. Are you Katie Austin Lee?
Yes.
Can you hear me all right, Ms. Lee?
Yes.
All right. I'm Judge Canal, and I'm arraigning you from the District Court in Holland. This is file 2516105FY. It is a 2-count complaint. It alleges that on or about February 21, 2025, in the city of Holland, count 1, that you did murder a minor child identified as AP, contrary to statute. This is an open murder homicide complaint, carries a penalty of life imprisonment. Count 2 alleges that on the same date time, and location that you did assault, batter, wound, resist, obstruct, oppose, or endanger Augustin Calderon, a police officer of the Holland Department of Public Safety, that you knew or had reason to know was performing his duties as a police officer. That charge is a felony, carrying a maximum possible penalty of 2 years in prison and or $2,000 fine. Now, you were given an advice of rights form, which you declined to sign, so I don't know whether you read it or not. That form...
I haven't received anything, sir.
Well,
I've been in the hospital.
I understand that. The rights that you
I
have...
have not fire or any...
The rights that you have are that you are presumed to be innocent of this charge. Prosecution has the burden of proving your guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. You have the right to a trial by a jury, or you and the prosecutor may agree to waive that right to a jury trial and have the case proceed as a non-jury trial. Are you requesting a court-appointed attorney, Ms. Lee?
I think so, yes. Yes.
Yes, all right. I will order that the Public Defender's Office select an attorney to represent you. And as I understand it, and Mr. Shirley, who's part of the Defender's Office, is standing by here. As I understand it, Mr. Shirley, Ms. Lee declined to be interviewed by staff in the Defender's Office up to this point. Is that correct?
That is correct, Your Honor. At least that's the information I have, but we will have someone visit her at the jail very soon.
All right. Good. Ms. Lee, you live in Holland at the 16th Street address, is that correct?
Yes.
How long have you lived at that address?
I think about 10 years.
Were you working at the time of this incident?
No, I'm disabled.
All right. Well, I've appointed an attorney to represent you. And as the attorney, Mr. Shirley said, there'll be someone from the Public Defender's Office out to see you right away. So I hope that you will take the opportunity to discuss this matter with that attorney. I'm going to grant the people's request that bond be denied for the time being, given the nature of the charge, which raises high risk of flight as well as public safety concerns that the court has. So bond is denied for right now, and we will be back here soon for the probable cause conference. Do you have any other questions of me, Ms. Lee?
No.
All right.
And here's another quick clip that I wanted to share.
As family gathered in the courtroom, the mom, Katie Austin Lee, appeared through a video hookup, her head bowed.
Good afternoon. Are you Katie Austin Lee?
Court records show she called 911 shortly after 4 Friday morning to say she could not get her son, Austin Pikaart, to stop breathing. Quoting court records, she advised her son asked her to help him stop breathing because he did not want to turn 18, that he wanted to die, and so did she. Records don't indicate why. They found her son dead in bed with a cut throat and cuts to an arm. Outside, a woman who identified herself as Lee's sister spoke only briefly.
The only thing I can say is take mental health serious. That's it.
The mom is expected back in court next week, and in the meantime, she's being held without bond in the Ottawa County Jail.
The sister-in-law's statement brings up what I agree is probably an important element to this case. Hopefully you still recall my previous opinion that Katie's demeanor in the courtroom in that video we just saw strikes us as a bit off. We can clearly see that something about her is not totally quote-unquote normal, and yet as someone who has a long-standing interest in abnormal psychology, not knowing what to attribute this odd behavior to can be frustrating. Is her gaze cast down due to shame, or is it a conscious attempt to appear somewhat docile or victim-like in the eyes of the court? I'd also mention the way that she seems to croak in this abnormal fashion anytime she goes to respond to a question.
Can you hear me all right, Ms. Lee?
Yes.
Well, Well, it's pretty impossible to tell. Is this her getting choked up? This, again, her trying to appear meek, maybe even wounded? Is she overly emotional, or is she void of emotion altogether? Is she perhaps doped up on psychiatric medication, or on the other hand, has she in fact missed a few doses by now? Is what we're seeing here, is this her illness speaking? Is this some sort of a shock response? Is everything just starting to sink in? Or another possibility, since we don't really have much of a baseline to go by, could this be how Katie Austin Lee just is all the time? As of right now, the big problem in this case is the fact that we only really know one side of the story, and that's all we're probably ever going to know. Austin is gone, and sadly we'll never really know his POV. And that's hugely problematic for pretty obvious reasons. From a legal standpoint, it probably matters less what the details are. I'm guessing that Mom will probably accept some sort of a plea bargain, or who knows, maybe after she speaks in greater depth with that court-appointed attorney of hers, she'll try to pull off some sort of an insanity defense. Either way, the main facts of the case are probably something that both sides are going to agree upon. That is, a 39-year-old mother caused the death of her 17-year-old son by slitting his throat with a kitchen knife. In most civilized countries, I believe, it doesn't matter whether one of the parties was consenting to the crime or not. Let's compare, for example, the notorious case of Armin Meiwes. Armin Meiwes, born in 1961, resided in Germany where he had spent his whole life consumed by the fantasy of cannibalizing another man. But Meiwes wasn't okay with the idea of going out and murdering some random person just so he could get his rocks off. To Meiwes, that taboo act, which the majority of us would find off limits, was quite the opposite. It was intimate. And so what Meiwes really longed for was to find himself a willing victim. In other words, the only way he would ever get to eat anybody is if somehow he managed to find someone who would actually consent to being killed and eaten. I know what most people might probably be thinking. A victim who would consent to being eaten? Sure, Armin, good luck with that. But the internet can be an interesting place. Evidence of that would surface in 2001 when Meiwes would receive a response for an ad he placed on an aptly titled forum called The Cannibal Cafe, where he literally spelled out his desire to meet up with someone who would allow himself to be eaten alive. It may have taken him decades, but it appeared as if Meiwes had finally found his perfect willing victim in 43-year-old engineer Bernd Brandes, who resided in nearby Berlin. I'll leave out the horrifying details of what exactly took place next, but let's just say the two men met up in March 2001 and Meiwes' ultimate fantasy would at last be fulfilled. Even prior to meeting up, both participants would agree to Meiwes' suggestion that he set up a camera to record every detail of their one and only date. It would appear that the purpose in this was twofold. For one, it would enable Meiwes to relive all the twisted events at a future time, as is not uncommon among sexual sadists to do. But for another, Meiwes had also hoped that it might serve as proof that Brandes had come to Meiwes' house and partaken in everything willingly. Long story short, it was Meiwes' own gluttony, by continuing to post similar ads in the same forum even after Brandes was long gone, that would eventually lead to the discovery of what was left of his willing victim's remains, and hence Meiwes' arrest. Not too surprisingly, his story made international headlines. According to Wikipedia, while jailed, Meiwes was diagnosed with a schizoid personality, but deemed mentally fit to stand trial. During interviews, Meiwes initially described his actions as assisted suicide. The trial acknowledged the agreement of the victim as not occurring under force, but emphasized that this did not make the act of killing legal, with special consideration for Brandes' impaired mental state, possibly further altered by his intake of sedative drugs at the time of his death. On January 30th, 2004, Meiwes was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 8 years and 6 months in prison. Later on, however, prosecutors appealed Meiwes' sentence and a retrial was ordered. Ultimately, this would result in a murder conviction for the more or less now celebrity cannibal and, this time around, a life sentence. Obviously, Armin and Katie's cases aren't exactly identical, but they do have a handful of striking similarities. I'm not going to point them all out, but one of the more relevant parallels happens to be one of the big legal, philosophical, and ethical questions that Meiwes' trial had brought up time and again. And that is the question about whether the fact that since Meiwes' victim did in fact appear to be a willing participant, did that necessarily do anything to assuage Meiwes' guilt in any manner? At the end of the day, in Meiwes' case, the answer would appear to be a resounding no. In fact, it was argued that despite that the two men had both agreed to what pretty much exactly was to take place on that night, weeks before their meeting, prosecutors argued that Brandes' state of extreme inebriation at the time during which it was all going on would have placed him in a state where he should not be deemed mentally fit to consent. While the U.S. legal system does not generally consider foreign case law as binding, it's been known to be considered for guidance, though not heavily relied on. That said, I think that in Austin and his mom's case, there are even more damning factors from Katie's standpoint. First of all, as in the case of Meiwes and Brandes, there'd be the problem of how inebriated Austin had been at the time, when he purportedly told his mother to please not take him to the hospital so that they could treat his OD. But even more so, would it even have mattered? Here's where the two cases differ yet again. Brandes had been a man in his 40s, whereas Austin was 17, a minor, and thus he would not have been legally able to consent to anything like this, regardless of his level of intoxication, or sobriety for that matter. Children, aka minors, are not deemed capable of entering into binding and lawful contracts, period. As far as the U.S. legal system is concerned, you can't trust any sort of an agreement or contract signed by a 17-year-old to be any more binding or legal than one that's signed by a person with severe retardation, advanced Alzheimer's, or who's just surpassed way beyond functioning levels of intoxication. At the end of the day, though, I feel as if this case really does leave us with more questions than it does answers. And here are just some of the questions that the 911 call didn't leave me feeling completely sold on. Did Austin really want to die before his 18th birthday? Did mom and son truly have some sort of a grotesque death pact? Was it really Austin who talked his 39-year-old mother into agreeing to kill him before his 18th birthday? It just sounds so far-fetched. But assuming for a moment that, yes, it is all true, well, if so, then whose idea was this? Because Katie stated that it was a mutual thing that the both of them had wanted. Well, who was it that first approached who with this crazy idea? And what are the odds that once approached, the other person's response would be something like, well, funny you should mention that, because dying sometime around your 18th birthday is exactly what I was hoping to do too. Ultimately, I want to know, was this teen boy really so desperate not to be around to see his 18th birthday? And if so, why? And what's the big significance surrounding his turning 18? Could this have been a seed that mom planted into Austin's head and which she nurtured and thus had grown over time? There also remain all these nagging inconsistencies. Although Katie insists throughout the duration of the 8-minute 911 call that they had consumed these drugs together, at one point she remarks that she had in fact been waiting until after Austin's birthday to depart the earth herself, whereas Austin, she claimed, needed to be taken care of immediately, and this was all due to the fact that for whatever reason he didn't want to turn 18.
Oh, and you said he is 17. Tomorrow's his 18th birthday.
Yeah, he didn't want to turn 18. I was going to wait until he turned 18. But he didn't want to turn 18.
Okay. Is there anybody else with you guys in the apartment?
No.
Okay.
Cats.
Okay.
I'd consider trying to stay neutral about this case, but it's difficult not to start questioning things when you're faced with such contradictory information. In the end, I can't say for sure I know what happened, but something reeks of serious hooey here. Let's just say I'm really curious as to the contents of both her and her son's toxicology reports, and I'm going to assume that they both did obtain one, just under the special circumstances of this case. And there's another statement she makes during the call, and it's the statement wherein she says this.
I didn't do this out of hatred. It was out of love.
Okay.
The world is not going to be okay for him.
Okay.
This could be seriously telling. It means something. To her, it means something. And yet, the implications of what it could mean, given our special circumstances here, are a bit unsettling. One thing I couldn't help but notice in researching this case is how, in one of the photos of Austin posted online, he's wearing these rather large headphones. So just one more time for this one too. This is simply just a theory, just a hunch and a speculation, but this does lead me to ask myself if Austin didn't in fact have some degree of autism. It is not an uncommon thing to see individuals with autism wear headphones similar to these in public, and that's to help them out with sensory overload. Every so often can occur in public places, namely where there's just a lot going on stimulation-wise. Well, I can't help but wonder if this is what Katie, the mother, was referencing while on the phone with 911 when she told the call taker that she worried he couldn't make it in the world alone. Well, that's really strange. Why is she so concerned, especially at this particular time when he's less than 24 hours from turning 18, about what she perceives as an inability for him to make it in the world alone? I mean, why worry about it so intensely now? Why not just go with the flow, just let things happen, and deal with any problems that might arise just as they arise? Furthermore, what else isn't clear is, why does she seem to have this conviction that he's going to have to forge through this world alone? What's the implication here? And like I said before, I strongly get the feeling here that this isn't just a case of empty words. I think it's a statement that warrants some thought, such as, did the mother really perceive him as that needy, or did she perceive herself as that important to him? If at least in her mind he was being taken care of by her to some significant extent, couldn't this have continued past him turning 18? Or maybe was she one of those mothers that felt exasperated and truly wanted out, but felt as if there was no one else in the world that could look out for him the way that she had? Had she herself developed some crippling yet irrational fear of the day he at last transversed into adulthood? So the last thing I guess I'm going to say about this, what does seem glaringly evident and very troublesome to me, is the way that this concern about Austin turning 18, and all these concerns actually, don't seem to be Austin's concerns so much as they seem to belong to the mom from what we have all seen. It seems like it's always, I didn't think he could make it in the world, but yet he doesn't want to turn 18. I'm afraid of what might happen to him later on in adulthood when the time comes for him to take care of himself, and therefore he really fears turning 18 and wants to make sure it doesn't happen. That's not logical. It's as if there's a problem, and Austin's death would be the thing that would solve that problem. But the problem is the mother's problem, not Austin's. Oh, I don't think he could have made it on his own, therefore Austin really wants to die. That hits very differently than if she might have said something like, Austin feared he wouldn't be able to make it in the world, therefore he hoped to die before he turned 18. In psychology, it's called projection. In this case, there are a couple of odd statements she makes which make it appear as if this mother's trying to project her own thoughts onto Austin. That's just a frightening thought when you start to consider the implications that may have had for the end of Austin's life. Unfortunately, there's even more to make a reasonable person a little wary. Why was it by the time that 6 p.m. rolled around when Mom felt it apt to go grab the knife to finish off Austin, Katie describes Austin as being in some deeply intoxicated state, wherein he's unable to keep himself from slipping out of consciousness, but at the same time his mother is still perfectly able to walk around to go retrieve knives and to stab her own son. Why was Austin so deeply inebriated by comparison to his mother? Although Katie may have sounded occasionally distracted or distraught during the time she spent on the phone with 911, she was still eons away from sounding like she was actually on the verge of permanently blacking out or like she was really that high on any type of medicine. She wasn't even slurring her words. She could speak in complete sentences and communicate her thoughts pretty well. She further understood what was going on and what the call taker was asking her. I'm going to be perfectly frank right now, but to me it barely sounded like she even seemed tired. Some people might argue that, seeing that there are times throughout the 911 call where Katie's voice sounds whiny and wispy, but for those who haven't had too much experience hearing what inebriated people on any type of substance sound like, then I hope you can trust me just a little that the way we hear this woman speaking on that call is not what would be expected of someone who took enough medicine to knock them out. There are a couple of times in which she's asked one question by the 911 dispatcher several times before Katie elects to answer the question, but she's not doing this as a result of being too high. This sounds to me more likely the result of certain thoughts that Katie has spent the last, 10 hours thinking about in her head. She is slow, and also I'm not asserting that the woman didn't ingest anything, but I would just argue that throughout this phone call, she may not be someone I'd advise getting behind the wheel of a car, but for the most part she knows what's going on and has control of her faculties and so forth. Her reasoning abilities are actually pretty surprising for someone who really took an amount of medicine she believed was going to be enough to kill her. The more I mull this over, in fact, the more flimsy her claim that she was seriously trying to do that looks to me. There's one psychological phenomenon at play here that I want to bring up for the fact that it's one of those things that probably has the tendency to fly over most people's radar, but that to me has become rather glaring after hearing the call so many times. Basically, with regard to the phone call again, if you pay attention closely, you'll start to pick up parts of the call where you can observe the mother's almost deliberate avoidance of certain words or certain terms. And with this one, there are handfuls of examples we could focus in on. In fact, hey, why not actually start with one of the very first things she says? As I'm sure everyone recalls, Katie tells this poor, confused call taker that my son won't stop breathing.
Okay, what's going on?
My son won't stop breathing.
He won't stop what?
Breathing?
He won't stop breathing?
Right.
Okay.
She probably knows very well that's going to confuse the hell out of the dispatcher, as it does. Even though this dispatcher happens to be pretty sharp, it still takes up to about 30 seconds until the dispatcher is made certain of what the two of them are discussing there exactly. Very quickly thereafter, when she realizes the call taker is going to need a little more assistance, she provides the following elaboration.
Like, is he, breathing too fast?
We were going to leave yesterday, and it got way out of hand. And I couldn't get him to stop breathing like he made me promise to do.
Luckily, like I'd mentioned, the call taker turns out to be sharp, and so it doesn't take her as long as it hypothetically could have taken for emergency services to find out what the problem is. But even here, Katie continues to speak and work in euphemism. We were going to leave yesterday, she says, instead of saying outright, we both were going to off ourselves. And examples of this just pretty much permeate the entire call. This isn't for no reason. From a psychological standpoint, when someone feels guilt inside of themselves, they may, whether subconsciously or consciously, have a difficulty verbalizing certain words related to the incident in question. Explained simply, it's because their own mind has yet to admit it to itself because it's something that's too difficult for that person to come to terms with just yet. I don't know how familiar you are with Ted Bundy, but during his final interviews, readers, or later readers, listeners, and viewers were able to observe something somewhat similar taking place when, after what's said to be some considerable coercing, Bundy agreed to talk in detail about some of the crimes he committed, but only if he could be allowed to do so in the third person. In essence, he would do it only if he didn't have to admit to having done it and could thus speak about it in a speculative fashion from the stance of a psychologically removed third party. And just so that it's perfectly clear, this wasn't any kind of a tactic Bundy was opting to use to keep himself out of trouble by this point. Bundy's execution date had already been set, and whether he admitted it or not, he had already been found guilty. These interviews occurred literally days, I think, before he was to be put to death. And his not just admitting to these crimes at this point would have benefited him in absolutely no way whatsoever. Therefore, what's far more likely is that psychologically, as big of an ultimate psychopath as he's always been labeled, his mind still required to maintain that notch of psychological distance from the crime. For whatever reason, his mind wasn't 100% ready to look at the atrocities he had committed with his own hands and to state to everyone unequivocally that it was he, Ted Bundy, who had done all of these repulsive things. This could be similar to what we hear Katie Lee doing for the fact that even though, yes, she's calling to confess to a crime, and a pretty grisly one at that, she mentally isn't able to fully come to accept what it is that she's done. I do feel it apt to point out that this doesn't have to necessarily imply guilt, but even though it very often is indicative of a guilty mind, so to speak, it just means that a person hasn't been able to properly or thoroughly process what was a traumatizing event just yet. The last psychological observation I have, I promise, is going to be short. Basically, recall Katie more or less explaining that the knives had been introduced into the situation after the original plan had not worked. Okay, but what if the plan had worked? For Austin, I mean. What if, after taking the overdose of pills, Austin had peacefully laid down and died? Here enters that nagging question. Now that Austin has successfully, from her point of view, passed on, what about Mom? How exactly was Katie planning to follow in Austin's footsteps, namely after seeing that the medicine hadn't worked? Not to mention there's some question as to how gone the mom even was by comparison. I'm seriously curious what Katie had planned to do at that point. The reason the whole suicide by cop idea doesn't sit well with me for this scenario is simply because it contradicts the story Katie would repeat to dispatchers, to officers, and presumably detectives and medics, and that being the story that goes like this. The mom and son had a mutual agreement to die together. They had both equally wanted out. If we're to buy that, then what was Mom's plan for ending her own life after Austin stopped breathing so that she could fulfill her own end of the bargain? It doesn't seem that there was any kind of plan, does there? Believe it or not, just considering how many times I've thrown it out there, I actually am on the fence. I think it would give me some more insight to know about Katie's possible mental illness, but of course, if she wants to remain private about that, it's something we have to respect. So, here are some of my final thoughts. First off, as to the question of where Katie stood, i.e., did she want to die? Did she not want to die? Well, I think when it all comes down to it, between her and the son, if I had to guess, I would say that yes, I do think that the mom, Katie, was likely to be grappling with thoughts of ending her own life. For how long, I have no way to know, but maybe we could take what her sister said at the court appearance as a hint, as cryptic as that message ultimately was.
The only thing I can say is take mental health serious. That's it.
Perhaps Katie had been struggling with known bouts of depression and hence suicidal ideation, or maybe she was even battling delusional thinking, perhaps brought on by bipolar disorder or some other comparable distorted state of mind. Once again, we don't know, but for the sake of the discussion, of course it's absolutely very possible that mental health could have definitely played a role in the events that took place over the course of Austin's final 2 days alive. And speaking of Austin, what about his disposition? Well, in our recording, we hear Katie say multiple times in multiple ways that she's had it with life, that she's done being here, that it's all just simply over. While she attributes this feeling to both herself and to Austin, let's just say I'm having a lot harder time buying that this was the case for Austin. It's hard for me to picture a scenario wherein Katie forcibly makes her son ingest all of the talked about medication and then after that cuts him with a kitchen knife, all without his permission. but it's equally difficult for me to think that Austin may have coincidentally wanted this as much as Mom did, not to mention all on the exact same terms. And so ultimately, as seriously strange as it seems, I do think it's more likely that at some point the mother got in her son's ear. That possibly in the end, Austin agreed to go along with the plan, but the original idea was planted there by his mom. I know it may sound crazy or far-fetched, or that it would be a hard thing to just convince someone to do, and it would be, but psychologically, under the right set of circumstances, it's not totally unfeasible. Furthermore, when I just sit here and try my best to envision the type of dynamic that Katie and her son might have had together, I'm drawn toward the impression that Austin may not have been altogether too difficult to convince, or at least not when it came to his mom. It's actually not impossible that Austin trusted his mother so wholeheartedly that getting him to agree with even some otherwise crazy-sounding, morbid-sounding double suicide plan wasn't super hard for him to start perceiving as normal the more that time went by. In the end, this is one of those things that remains up in the air. That is, how conscious an effort was this all on Katie's part? Did she approach the boy knowingly with the intention of trying to convince him to end their lives together? Or did she just happen to bring up the subject one day, confiding in him her own dark intentions, only to have this inadvertently cause Austin to begin experiencing suicidal ideation of his own? Another of Katie's odd statements that I believe she herself had 100% faith in when she stated it to the 911 dispatcher was the assertion that in doing what she ultimately did, she acted out of love rather than out of hatred or any sort of malicious reason.
No, it's okay, Katie. I
didn't do this out of hatred. It was out of love.
Okay.
The world is not going to be okay for him.
Okay.
I do think that in her own twisted way, that's how she saw it. Not like she was hurting Austin by taking his life, but like she was protecting him from a world that was going to be anything but kind to him or easy for him to live in, or even, as she quite possibly saw it, a world that would make things hard for him. One theory I'm personally apt to lean toward is the one that states that Katie had already decided, for whatever reason, that she didn't want to live anymore, and yet the only way to save Austin, whom she saw as being dependent on her, was to end his life too. The biggest piece of evidence for me personally is something I actually had encountered within the very first 10 seconds of the 911 call itself, but didn't realize until the very end. Let me play that quick clip for you.
Out of 911.
Hi, I need an officer here immediately.
Okay, to where?
And there it was. Believe it or not, I listened to this clip over what easily had to be over a dozen times before it was even drawn to my attention that something so telling could potentially exist within the first 10 seconds of this mundane, albeit cuckoo phone call. But believe it or not, that's literally how early on it accosts us. Immediately, right from the get-go, we hear Katie say to the dispatcher, "Hi, we need an officer here immediately." And of course, what's so strange about this is the fact that Katie's request is specifically not for an ambulance, rather it's quite specifically for a police officer. Once again, this statement is, in my opinion, far more telling than most of us, I think, would first give it credit for. When we ask ourselves, why in the world did Katie do this? I think we're left with just two probable theories. The first is that she called and requested police be sent over for the fact that she wanted to turn herself in. She had tried so long and so hard to stop the breathing, and in the end she had failed, and so consequently it was all now game over and she was doing the right thing, turning herself in. That's one possibility. The other possibility is that Katie was calling for cops because she was truly hoping to set up a suicide by cop scenario, whereby, of course, police officers would enter her place of residence and be provoked by her own subsequent actions to take her life out of the imaginary or staged need for self-defense. And that makes some sense if you actually consider what unfolds at Katie's apartment next, once the officers get there. The details are a little murky, but from what the news has managed to report, we know pretty clearly that despite being told several times to put down the knife as well as other weapons by dispatchers, she still manages to cling onto one of the knives, which she then uses to threaten one of the police officers on scene. In combination with that, we also have the statements we hear Katie repeatedly insist to the 911 call taker that she's done, that she doesn't want to be alive anymore, etc. I don't know if suicide by cop had been part of Katie's plan for a while, or else if it's something she just came up with on the spur of the moment, but it's not something I think we should rule out at this stage. In the end, if I had to guess, I guess that there is pretty much all there is to my thoughts on the case and the events that unfolded. I think that, unfortunately, we have more unanswered questions than we have answers, truth be told, and I'm personally still on the fence about quite a number of things. All I want to do is add the probability that Austin may very likely have just been a decoy when it all comes down to this call to 911 and everything that's behind it. I don't think she wanted the boy to accidentally, miraculously somehow be resuscitated. Then in various news reports, we hear it being stated more or less that Austin was found dead upon the arrival of first responders. But even if we didn't have anybody stating all that, let's just examine our odds plain and simple. And for that, I'm going to want you to just picture something here. Picture that, as reported, Katie and son ingest medications hoping that they will both OD. Then, about 5 hours go by, and when Katie realizes the pair still haven't OD'd, she goes and takes a kitchen knife and she proceeds to cut her son's throat. Then for 10 agonizing hours, she waits for him to slowly bleed out. Except that doesn't happen. And now 10 hours later, Katie is sitting over her son, wondering what she should do. In the end, it's finally, after 10 long, labored hours of watching and waiting for him to die, that Katie at last makes the decision that enough is enough, and so she reaches for the nearby phone and she dials 911 to report her emergency. This is all, of course, Katie's version of events, just by the way. When 911 picks up, Katie lets them know her problem, which of course is that 10 hours of waiting after she's cut him, and her son just still will not stop breathing. The craziest part in all this story, however, is the part that happens very next thing. Of all times Austin could have taken his final breath, it ends up being sometime during Katie's 8-minute call with 911 that he finally does, all of which makes for some pretty darn miraculous odds if you stop to do the math. But of course, the odds of this happening may not be an impossible occurrence, but they do amount to insanely unlikely. To me, it seems more likely that Katie had ensured Austin was dead prior to her making the call. Because recall also that part in the recording where the call taker asks Katie her name, followed by the name of the son. Recall how all of that goes down.
What is your name?
My name is Katie.
Okay, what's your son's name?
His name was Austin.
As you probably noticed, Katie talks about herself in the present tense, which is totally normal, of course. But when she goes to tell them Austin's name, she talks about him in the past tense. She doesn't say his name's Austin, she says his name was Austin. It's just difficult to think that Katie would be compelled to refer to her son in the past tense, even if she knew he most likely was not going to survive at that point, unless at that point she knew that he was actually already dead. But again, it's all just speculation, and I really cannot emphasize that aspect enough. These are mostly just thoughts off the top of my head, and they really don't mean anything more than that. I'm only sharing because it does tend to get difficult to make these videos without your brain sometimes just kicking into over-analysis mode. And on that note, if you have your own thoughts or theories about this case, you're more than welcome to share all of that down below. Just one more section to go before wrapping this all up. One of the last things I wanted to talk about was Austin himself. Austin's online obituary may help to clue us in a bit about what type of person Austin was. Some might be surprised at what comes across as a personality filled with a total zeal for life, believe it or not. According to said obituary, Austin, who was born on February 22nd, 2007, I quote, was an exceedingly interesting character who had a love for cats, science, books, fishing with his dad, roller coasters, and video games. Austin had a patient, gentle, kind-hearted soul, as well as a great love for helping others. He was an adventurous spirit with such little fear and an all-around one of a kind. He loved to make goofy faces and give facts on things that he learned. In addition, Austin could name every Pokemon card character in less than 4 minutes. He loved ketchup on chicken, ice cream, candy, and was a big fan of pizza and soft tacos, all the good stuff. Austin was loved by so many and was not only a son, but a big stepbrother, a cousin, a nephew, a grandson, and a friend to many. The social media page he appears to have managed himself, albeit when a bit younger, continues to show his enthusiasm for some of the simple things, such as, once again, earning a high score on a video game or getting to share a feel-good song with a close-knit group of friends. The profile also depicts an active lifestyle. In one post accompanied by an array of uploads or photos, Austin announces, started martial arts class, motivated, excited to learn. There's a lot to learn. Need a punching bag. Little by little, black belt will be earned one day. Yet in another post, the young man links to a YouTube video which happens to be a cover of the Beatles' famous tune, I Want to Hold Your Hand. All in all, his posts, albeit few, are consistent in their expression of positivity and a belief in working hard to achieve a healthy goal, like with his black belt. Furthermore, the music and films and even games he seems to gravitate toward seem to be all very wholesome. Even if maybe he did have his moments when he looked down on himself like we all do, what's more than noticeable is the way that he maintains a positive attitude no matter what, and he does it even better than most grown-ups do, if I must say. A slightly more recent profile, also run by Austin, states for his bio, "I am just a young guy hoping to help out cats." And while there are few photos, the ones that are posted reveal his love for cats, and the captions portray nothing but a thoroughly caring individual. So just once again, I'm not led in one direction or another, but it does increase my confusion about what exactly made the days leading up to Austin's 18th birthday in February of 2025 turn out the way they ultimately did. Well, it's really hard to picture a person like the one we see come across in his profile ever allowing a dark thought to sneak in. I guess the other side of the argument would probably be that we all know how deceiving social media can be, how so very often what we see depicted as happy, often even perfect lives are under the facade of smiling photo uploads and uplifting memes, anything but what they appear to portray. I think we've just got to accept that, as for right now, there are just things about this case that we have no way to know. One final page that surprised me to discover online, but which I'm sharing mostly for the additional endearing tidbits we get to learn about Austin, is actually a GoFundMe page. GoFundMe pages are, if anyone out there wasn't aware, fundraiser pages that usually allow the organizer to easily rake in large amounts of money for whatever their particular cause. The organizer who put together this page for Austin is a relative named Melissa Pikaart. Right off the bat, she writes the following: "It is with deep sorrow and a heavy heart that we announce the untimely passing of young Austin Dean Pikaart. His life was tragically cut short on February 21st, leaving us in profound grief. Due to the sensitive nature of the circumstances, we will refrain from sharing intimate details at this time." From there, it jumps forward to state that Austin was caring, humorous, playful, and most of all loved and cared for his family and friends. He loved video games and all things space and galaxy themed, and someday we plan to launch his ashes into space on an actual rocket ship for his final destination. It was truly an honor to have known him, and he will be deeply missed. If you're anything like me, by this point you may have begun to feel a bit confused, like what exactly are funds being raised for? With regard to that friend's opinion, I'm only going to mention the rest of what was written and just let you arrive at your own conclusions about that. The very next paragraph states the following: "The loss of an only child brings profound emotional pain and stress, often accompanied by unexpected financial burdens." And finally, the organizer adds, and again I quote, "Some of you have reached out and asked how you can help us during this time. Know that your kindness is much appreciated as we navigate this heartbreaking moment. We kindly ask, if you are able to donate funds towards Austin's Celebration of Life service." The fundraiser asks for donations totaling a sum of $12,000, and at the time of this initial writing, they seem to slowly be inching toward their goal, having just surpassed $8,000 in donations. If memory serves, every now and then when I'm facing a dilemma, I'll turn to one of several AIs who have been helpful to me in the past. This time I had a quick conversation with Claude, just because after I looked at the GoFundMe, I wasn't sure what to think exactly. Thankfully, Claude managed to help put things into perspective. The first thing I wanted to know is, what is the Celebration of Life service?
Yes, a Celebration of Life service is an alternative to a traditional funeral that focuses on honoring and celebrating the life of someone who has passed away, rather than primarily mourning their death. These ceremonies tend to be more personalized and often less formal than traditional funerals. They typically highlight the person's personality, accomplishments, passions, and the positive impact they had on others. The tone is usually more uplifting, though they still provide space for grief and remembrance. A Celebration of Life service as the justification for a $12,000 fundraising goal raises significant questions. 1. Cost perspective. A Celebration of Life service, even a generous one, typically costs far less than $12,000. Such events commonly range from $1,000 to $5,000 for venue, catering, decorations, programs, and other elements combined. 2. Necessity versus preference. While memorial events are meaningful, a $12,000 celebration appears excessive. More modest gatherings can be equally respectful and meaningful. If they genuinely want to honor the young man's memory, there are many meaningful ways to do so without significant expense. A small gathering at a home or park, creating a memorial website, planting a tree, or establishing a small scholarship in his name. While grief is deeply personal and everyone processes it differently, the amount being requested specifically for a celebration of life service seems disproportionate to both typical costs and the described relationship. In reality, the death of someone who wasn't living with or financially connected to a family typically wouldn't create significant new expenses for them. There are few legitimate reasons they would suddenly face major expenses. They wouldn't be legally obligated to handle funeral expenses. These would typically fall to the mother, even if incarcerated, or be handled through the mother's resources, state assistance, or the young adult's own estate. The request for charitable funds in this scenario does raise questions. If someone is fundraising for unexpected expenses in a situation like this, it might be worth clarifying. What specific costs are they facing? Why are they, rather than other parties, responsible for these expenses? If they're voluntarily taking on expenses like funeral costs, is that truly an unexpected financial hardship? You're right to question this. While grief is certainly real regardless of closeness, significant financial impact would be unusual for family members who weren't actively involved in the person's life.
I think those are all very valid points, and believe me, I know it can feel bad to even question a fundraiser's validity when an individual's child has just been killed, but it's not wrong. In fact, I think it's the right thing to do. I'm all about being generous and giving, but unless we can justify a need, there are so many other helpful ways in which we can give to a family that is experiencing any form of loss or grief. Remember that. Now with that said, let's wrap this up. And you know what? Actually, I think a celebration of life is a great idea. So let's maybe make that our big takeaway today. Remember to take the time to be grateful today for those who make you happy, and maybe also make a little bit of effort to do something positive today, mainly for somebody else whom you care for and who maybe you feel could use a little extra love, or else just someone with whom you're long overdue for some catching up. I hope you enjoyed this installment. Please leave a like if you did. Besides that, be safe as always, and I'll see you right here for the next one.